Hey guys, thank you once again for tuning into the DDT Method podcast. This week, I'm bringing you part 2 of my discussion with Anthony Castor. We're diving into everything human enhancement, from peptides, small molecules, to full protocols that you guys can even look into implementing yourselves immediately after listening to the podcast. Or during, if you just want to start poking yourself with needles and whatnot. No judgment, we all do it. Nonetheless, this is week 2 with Anthony Castor. Hey guys, I'm going to interrupt myself really quickly, but I'm going to do it to make 2 really cool announcements. Announcement number 1 is we'll be opening the DDT Method exclusive members group. This will be a private community where we can go over things in more detail than we can on YouTube or really any social media platform, going over peptide protocols, overall peptide descriptions and guides, information on how to take different PEDs, utilize them at different times in different courses, and what to do in the background while all this is going on, what type of training to do, what type of diet. This will be an open discussion amongst every badass out there that listens to this podcast and wants to push the limits of their physique and their performance. I'm looking forward to a lot of really cool discussions with a lot of you guys day in and day out, as well as, again, exclusive protocols that I'll be releasing week by week. The other announcement that I'd like to make is that we are launching Real Primal Human. The RPH coaching program is a network of individuals that I've built that are the best and brightest in the coaching industry today, and we'll be bringing you exclusive information as a community and some of the best coaching that you'll be able to find on the planet to optimize your life, from your performance to your cognition to your longevity. I've assembled a team of some of the best trainers on the planet, and we want to help you smash your goals in record time and to do it the right way, taking the bits and pieces of every methodology out there that's intelligently put together and putting together a hybrid methodology that's combining everything that we know works to guarantee you success. Click the link below for more information on Real Primal Human, as well as the exclusive DDT Method group. Now, if we're going to hyper focus on fat loss for a bit, I'd feel weird not bringing up retatrutide because it's so incredibly topical right now.
Yeah.
But instead of really bringing it up and diving into it, because there's a lot of content out there on retatrutide, you and I have spoken about it before. I've had a number of people come on and speak about retatrutide. I kind of want to look at GLPs as a whole and retatrutide as a transitional point, because I want to talk about Bioglutide. Bioglutide is now available. So what is that? How is it different? And go into a little bit of detail on how somebody that's been utilizing retatrutide since its inception and availability in the marketplace became such a thing, and why would we potentially want to look to switching to Bioglutide, and why?
Yeah. So first of all, in terms of optimally leveraging bioglutide, I've got to give you the credit on that. In our discussion, when you mentioned how you were going to be using it, that hadn't really been something that I considered, but it's absolutely brilliant, and we'll definitely get to that. But to bring everybody up to speed so we can have the conversation around it, let's talk about the different GLPs, what they are, and what bioglutide is, and why it's different. So most of us are probably familiar with semaglutide. That's just going to be a single GLP-1 agonist. Then we've got our tirzepatide, and that's going to be a dual agonist. That's going to be GLP and GIP. Then, of course, retatrutide, triple agonist, GLP, GIP, and glucagon. And what makes bioglutide so unique is you probably saw all the fear mongering about people losing muscle. So it seemed logical. Well, maybe there's something we can do that is in the blood sugar family, so to speak, that would prevent loss of muscle. And some people have also noticed that, when you start taking a GLP-1, you get that little dip in HRV. Well, what if this could also improve outcomes for HRV, not give up any of the benefits that we're getting when we take a GLP, and preserve muscle? And I mean, that sounds pretty cool so far. But then they even took it a step further. The barrier to entry for some people out there is going to be injection. And what if this was orally bioavailable? So whoever thought of this, like, tip of the hat. I mean, that is brilliant. and here we are. So, bioglutide is a quad agonist, modulates GLP, GIP, glucagon, and IGF-1, and it's orally bioavailable. So this is one of those things. If somebody says, I came out with an injectable bioglutide, um, you have my permission to tilt your head like a dog when you ask them something weird, and scratch your head and say, "Well, I don't know why you do that," because it is bioavailable orally, and that's been demonstrated in humans. Now, when we think about like use case scenarios and like when's an ideal time to use it, so there's a couple of different strategies around this. In the human studies, they used it by itself. Then they used a really low dose of tirzepatide with bioglutide, and then of course they had their uh, uh, losing the word for it, their control. So what they found is the group with the tirzepatide and the bioglutide, of course, did the best. Now, when we think about why, bioglutide can do awesome on its own, but when we've got four things that it's modulating and it's orally bioavailable, so kind of a shorter half life, um, some of its benefit is going to come around timing, and I'll unpack that a little bit more. And it's really the goal of it, although there is going to be some mild appetite suppression. It's more about optimizing insulin sensitivity, um, balancing sympathetic parasympathetic tone, um, and uh, by doing that, essentially you're not going to be releasing sugar into the bloodstream at the wrong time because of a stress response, and supporting mTOR. So things like nerve repair, vagal tone, um, protein synthesis, those are all things that are going to be supported with it. So if we use like a really low dose of, and it could really be any of the GLPs. Um, if you're using a really low dose, and my suggestion for what I'm doing is like a quarter of what you normally take. So, for example, if you're taking 1 milligram of retatrutide, 0.25 milligrams of retatrutide, or if you're doing 2 milligrams of tirzepatide, zero point 0.5 milligrams of tirzepatide, and this is just once a week. Don't microdose it, because what you're going to be microdosing on the days after you worked out, and I'll explain this more in a second. That's when you're going to take your bioglutide. Reason you do that is because that's it goes back to the whole vision fusion mTOR thing. We want to drive mTOR after a workout. We want to send the signal to rebuild, um, so that we can fuse those mitochondria together. Um, we also want to be able to shift back to a parasympathetic state. That's going to let our nervous system recover. Because remember, muscles can recover in 12 to 48 hours. Nervous system, generally 72 hours. So if we have something where we can flip back to a parasympathetic state more efficiently, that's going to increase our ability to train more frequently. And if we can train more frequently and recover from it, it goes to figure we're probably going to make more progress. Also, IGF increases or signals mTOR, which is going to improve protein synthesis, so rebuilding after a workout. Um, so again, when we think about timing of this, if we do it after a workout and we've got that like super subclinical dose of a GLP in the background, or even taking a break from the GLPs and using it, and this was Drew's idea, which I love, using it as a bridge in between, um, your normal GLP use. You're getting all those benefits of positive effects on postprandial glucose, creating an AMPK favorable environment around workout time so that you're getting rid of those bad cells. You're making energy substrate available, but right at the right time, you're giving a little boost to that mTOR signal. And on top of that, you're improving your parasympathetic tone. So it seems like just a genius way to get the health benefits that we all love from our GLPs, um, even some nervous system benefits that might not be there with the tools we have available prior to bioglutide, and um, decrease the chances of losing any of that muscle that we work so hard to put on.
Now, give me a little bit of detail on that new constituent that bioglutide brings to the table in terms of IGF-1. Is this like a small molecule that's increasing our endogenous IGF-1? Is it like taking injectable IGF LR3 or DES, or is it like increasing our exogenous growth hormone dosage? What exactly are we doing to our IGF-1 with bioglutide specifically?
The easiest way to explain it, and that's a really good question. So to give you a couple scenarios, if we think about like if we take IGF long R3, a lot of people are familiar with that. Um, that essentially is going to have a systemic effect, and that systemic effect is going to be active for up to 48 hours. So that's kind of this constant mTOR. If we take like an IGF DES, significantly shorter um, half life, and that's going to be more localized. So when we think about the IGF modulation that's in um, the bioglutide, the way that I envision it is kind of like you got this, like you got a stereo receiver, and um, you're always going to have your bass, your treble, your balance, and your volume. But you can turn those knobs however you want to. Like for some weird reason, if you're all the way to the right of the room and you want the speakers all the way on the right, you can turn that balance over there. And for the sake of analogy, maybe that balance is GIP. And maybe you want that bass turned way up, which we'll just call the GLP. And maybe the glucagon right now, we don't want that really turned up at all, because we've got plenty of energy substrate available and we don't want to signal the breakdown of more. So that treble is pretty much turned down to like a one. And then volume, whether we're going to be like crank it up to 10, like we're going full mTOR, or turn it down to a one. Parents are trying to sleep in the other room. Um, that's going to be that dial for IGF. So when we think about bioglutide, essentially it's a single structure that has these four knobs on there that can be turned depending on what you're trying to do with that environment. And wherever the support is needed, that's going to kind of affect the how much or how little we're turning those knobs. And the signal for those knobs, like how do we know what to do? Um, that's where things like circadian alignment play a big role. And then the stimulus that we're sending from, are we eating a lot of food? That's going to be mTOR dominant. Or are we eating less food, AMPK? Or are we training really hard? Driving fission and wanting some mTOR after that? Or are we doing something more restorative, like taking a walk, AMPK, low calories, fusion? Um, so it has that um, almost intelligence to be able to recognize the signals that are coming in from the environment. And just like peptides do in general, they don't really replace a signal. What they do is they make that signal clearer and louder if it needs to be, but easier to understand.
Awesome. So let's talk protocol a little bit. Let's give some people some potential actionables based on what we were talking about experimenting with. And I can't stress that enough. Experimenting with. This is something that we came up in conversation. So this is neither Anthony nor myself saying like this is the protocol y'all need to do. But I presented Anthony with the thought process of a lot of the people that are going to be the most interested in utilizing bioglutide are likely the people that have already been experimenting with retatrutide. So most of us that are in this world are, to steal a phrase from, I believe, Sal from Mind Pump, where we tend to be cosmonauts in a bit of a way, where we want to go out and explore and use these different tools and possibilities and polypharmacy and whatnot in the most safe and educated way possible. But basically what I'm trying to say is a lot of the people that have tried or want to try bioglutide have tried some other stuff before. Now, in my case, I work as a coach, I work as an educator, I host this podcast. I have a lot of situations where I stand to benefit from, or at least provide a better service from, having personal experience with a lot of these things. So that said, I have been on retatrutide since December of last year, 2024. Now, I haven't been cranking it the whole time, but I got my hands on it. I have a very reliable source for it. I've experimented with doses ranging from 0.5 milligram per week for prolonged periods of time, all the way up to, I believe, 8 milligrams per week was the max that I drove that up to. I've used it with cagrilintide. I've come off it for 3 to 5 weeks at a time and added it back in. I just wanted to be experienced with all doses and a significantly long duration with it. And I've monitored my blood work. It's only improved, et cetera, et cetera. So needless to say, in a nutshell, very experienced personally with retatrutide right now. I'm also the type of person that tries to be cognizant of the fact that outside of maybe my testosterone replacement, I don't really want to be on any drug indefinitely. I don't want to have to use drugs or peptides just to be human. I want to use them to leverage them in certain ways for certain results for health, performance, and longevity. So that said, I was in a place where I was planning on coming off of retatrutide, and I still am. We began talking about bioglutide. I became very intrigued by utilizing it, and then I presented, why don't we utilize it in such a way that we, at your advisement, cut down the retatrutide to about 1/4 of a dose. Right now, I've been utilizing about 6 milligrams per week. So that would put me at about 1.5 milligrams per se, and incorporate a low dose of bioglutide, do that for 2 to 3 weeks, come off the retatrutide entirely, increase to a higher dose of bioglutide, and then in that time, shift some of the things that I'm doing in terms of my training, my dietary intake, not to really make waves, but to just transition away from a AMPK dominant, fat loss dominant. I want to just basically get as lean as possible and stay that way, into more of a recomp, slightly rebuild, maybe look at putting on some lean tissue. I'm not really trying to get much bigger, but kind of flip the script in such a way and change things to go in that direction. Now, how would you modify some of the other things that I'm doing in this transitional period? Because some of my thoughts were doing some things like backing off on the SLU, maybe increasing my, not duration of use, but increasing the days in the week where I use SS31, something that's going to be a little bit more reparative and restorative, and maybe even leverage some exogenous growth hormone to drive my own IGF levels up that way. Now, I haven't presented that to you yet. That might be a terrible idea. What are your thoughts on stuff like that?
I absolutely love it. That is brilliant. In fact, almost exactly what I would suggest. Just to give people some numbers, and maybe this will help when we're thinking about um, kind of how do we go up in dose on the bioglutide? How would I do that relative to us going down in dose on the retatrutide? So, for simplicity's sake, let's just say you use uh, 1 milligram a week of retatrutide, and it's got a 7-day half life. So, by day 14, you've got about 25% of that retatrutide still left in your system. By the time you get to day 35, there's only little less than 3% left. And that just has to do with like half lives and elimination. So if we completely cut out um, retatrutide, what that means going on our 1 milligram dose is essentially like day 7, without doing another shot, you're at 0.5 milligram. Day 14, you're at 0.25 milligrams. And that was kind of our goal, the 0.25 milligrams. Day 21, 12.5 milligrams, but we've already hit the 0.25 milligrams, so we'll go with that. So then if we wait, about a week, and then we add in. So this would essentially be like day 28. We add in 0.25 milligrams of retatrutide, or don't add it, and then on training days only, that's what I would do. On training days only, I would add 30 milligrams of bioglutide. And um, essentially, bioglutide, orally available. It's basically 24-hour half life. So you're going to, um, on those days, have a little bit more of a push, but you're also getting the IGF signaling, and then you still have the blood sugar management, insulin sensitivity benefits of the retatrutide. And then if we don't add any retatrutide to that, um, I don't want to confuse people too much, but there'd still be essentially like 6.25 milligrams from our initial, we stopped taking it. So maybe we even cut the retatrutide down to like um, half of a milligram, which means now we're kind of like hovering right around uh, about 20, right between about 20 and 30 milligrams for the week. And then potentially we, on the training days only, um, depending on where we were at in terms of our results, that might be an opportunity to go up another 30 milligrams on the bioglutide. Um, to give some context, when they did the human studies with the tirzepatide, they went up to 150 milligrams. So we're still talking about a pretty low dose here. And then just following that pattern, that I guess kind of the takeaway without focusing on numbers is retatrutide's going down, bioglutide's going up. And what we're left at kind of the end of, say, like 35 days would be like pretty much bare minimum, if any, retatrutide in our system. And then bioglutide, maybe we're at a little higher dose, but we're only doing that on workout days. And the reason we're doing that is for the benefits that we talked about earlier. Now, I love the thought of using growth hormone for this phase, especially because uh, what you explained is that you've already reached your fat loss goal. We want to make this a little bit more of a kind of a recomp. So having that little extra bit of um, IGF push and the mTOR signaling that comes with exogenous growth hormone compared to like a GHRH, GHRP, um, that would make a lot of sense to me. If you're going to do that, this would probably be the best place to do it. And then SS31, brilliant addition, because think about what we've been doing. We've been working that mitochondria pretty hard with SLU, and we want to stabilize those membranes in the cardiolipin. Remember, if we're in an mTOR state, this is also a time when we can push things like our plasmalogens, phosphatidylcholine, linoleic, alpha linoleic acid, to rebuild all those cell membranes. So this is an opportunity not just to recomp, but to have like the most kick-ass cell walls and mitochondrial membranes in the history of phospholipids. And then the one thing I maybe add in addition to that, peptide wise, that I think could be really beneficial. Remember that when we take SLU, it's got that strong signaling to use more fat for energy. And we're supporting the mitochondrial structure with SS31. Now, if we were to add in on our off days of training when we're getting our fasted cardio in, um, we were to add in MOTS-c, remember, MOTS-c is going to improve fuel switching in the mitochondria. So that's going to help it remember how to have that extreme flexibility, like burning fat, burning sugar. So that'll kind of restore that. And we want to have that increased ability to use carbohydrate for energy because of the types of workouts that we're likely to be doing during this time, and to really kind of top off those glycogen stores maximally. Now, because there's AMPK signaling involved with the timing of MOTS-c, that's why I say do it on a day that you're not training, first thing in the morning, empty stomach. Then you're going to leverage the AMPK benefits, so you're still getting cell cleanup, autophagy, um, and when you're creating the stress signal to that outer mitochondrial membrane that trips off that AMPK signaling, that's going to break down fats, carbohydrates for energy availability. It's happening when you're doing your long fasted walks. So the intelligent choice the cell is going to make is going to be to use as fats for energy. But because of how MOTS-c works and improving fuel switching efficiency, it's going to remember as soon as you need to later that day when you're going to work out. Well, now you've got this stockpile of ATP that you made from um, oxidative phosphorylation earlier in the day. You've got that. I can switch gears right to glucose now from the MOTS-c signaling earlier. After your workout, you have your um, let's get the mTOR going and get the parasympathetic benefits from the IGF. And you're doing your growth hormone at night, so another IGF pulse and improving protein synthesis. And with even with the demand that's going to be coming from your hard training, increased calories, you're supporting the mitochondrial membrane with the SS31. So I think that's brilliant, Drew. I love where you're at on that.
Now, I'll definitely leverage this in, but I want to make sure I'm leaving no stone unturned here. So, we're talking about these potential off days or cardio only days of running that MOTS-c, which, in a nutshell, one way I like to explain it to people is that's basically increasing the efficiency of all of these processes and substrate utilization, insulin sensitivity, and everything in between. Would there be any benefit to using something like a 5-amino 1MQ on those days to enhance fat loss specifically through that NMNT inhibition?
Yeah, the 5-amino 1MQ, as long as homocysteine isn't high, you could use that on every day because for exactly that reason, it's going to decrease NNMT. When you decrease NNMT, that shrinks the fat cells and makes more NAD available. My personal way that I do it is on a day that I'm training, I take the 5-amino 1MQ if I'm weight training, and then on a day where I'm doing like the fasted cardio. And I actually just learned this about a week ago. I take the 1-MNA, but I switched to doing that in the evening instead of the morning. And there's a circadian component to NAD, but when we look at how 1-MNA works, it's recycling. So actually doing that later in the day has some, uh, at least from the couple things that I just recently came across, looks like it's got some additional benefits for the vascular system and um, the supporting the salvage pathway.
Now, would it make sense to run like maybe an NMN in the morning and an MNA in the evening?
I probably wouldn't worry too much about boosting NAD with like an NMN or an NR. Um, Now there are some specific situations, like if somebody has like an event, and it's kind of a one-off, we want to have high NAD levels. Um, you could even make a case for like a sub-Q NAD injection or taking an NR. But if we boost those on a regular basis, especially with the population that I think we're talking about with bodybuilders, you really got to keep an eye on homocysteine. Um, so not to say it would be like horrible thing, but and if you would have asked me 4 months ago, I probably would have said, yeah, I'd take an NR and then use something to keep that down. But through my experience and what I'm finding with the people I'm working with is if we just have the 5-amino 1MQ and 1-MNA, we don't even really need to worry about increasing those NAD levels um, outside of certain situations like a specific competition or somebody's sick or something like that. But we're talking healthy population. The my go-to for improving that whole NADH is the ketone ester, specifically a ketone monoester, which is going to be, I like the Kinetic Pro. Tastes really good, and it's the exact same ester as the KE4, which I also like. It's just in terms of compliance for the people I work with, we've had a lot more compliance since using the Kinetic Pro, with it tasting
Mhm.
so much better.
Right. It definitely does. It definitely does. Now, what about there's another one that you mentioned, the FOXO4 peptide can be leveraged in with 5-amino 1-MQ. What's that doing?
Yes, I should explain that a little bit better. When we take FOXO4, what we really want to do is kind of use that one by itself. So, and when we think about kind of like what's an ideal use case scenario for FOXO4, when do we use it? What's it good for? Um, it's gonna really help get rid of senescent cells. And that could be like, senescent. When we talk about senescent cells, those are kind of our zombie cells. It can be like bad, like tumor cells, those sorts of things, like a fatty tissue with a vascular supply. Um, so that would be something that we would do maybe like 3 times a year. And we want to do that by itself because when we do that, when we get rid of these senescent cells, there's going to be like sometimes people can kind of have this Herxheimer reaction from all the SASPs and die off. And we don't want to really drive the system or anything during that time. We want to let it clear out that toxin load and recalibrate. Where where the 5-amino 1-MQ comes in is like if we're leveraging that right before we get to where we're taking the FOXO4, and we've got optimal mitochondrial function. Um, Essentially, we've got the energy for all the processes that we're going to need for the cleanup that the FOXO4 is going to give us. And when we think about like FOXO4 use, the I have people do like a 3-day cycle, and it's calculated on it's a body weight calculation for the amount they do, and then on that first day, you're splitting it into 5 doses, um, generally about hour apart, and you're just seeing, at that lowest like fifth of a dose of what we calculate. Is there a reaction to it? And if so, that gives you the flexibility to stagger another couple hours. Because what we don't want to do is overload the system with that. Um, and then after the 3 days, that would be now because the we've cleared out that senescent burden, and um, even potentially, there's some talk about how that might help with some cancers, but I don't have the facts to support that. So we'll just talk about senescent cells here. Um, but now, if we think about why, what's the problem with taking NAD? If we take NAD and we've got a high senescent burden and we've upregulated CD38, um, the cancer cells and senescent cells are sucking up that NAD. So now, hopefully, this makes a little bit more sense. Now, if we think about if we do that before, we didn't raise NAD, but we just made sure that NMMT was really low. So we are powering the mitochondria. Mitochondria are perfect. Now we run our FOXO4 protocol. We clear out that senescent burden. Now, right afterwards, now we can give ourselves, this would be a perfect time for like that NR or an NAD because we've cleared out that senescent burden. So that's going to be like uh, gold rush to all the good cells. And then we take the 5-amino 1-MQ with it. So that's even active longer. We're going to get so much more out of the 5-amino 1-MQ, the potentially the NAD. And I wouldn't do that any more than a week, the NAD. And because both of those compounds are more effective, and as we explained earlier, the 5-amino 1-MQ by decreasing NNMT shrinks fat cells. Now, hopefully that explains a little bit better, like how we could leverage a compound some people might not really think about as part of a really effective fat loss protocol. It's just that little intermittent 3 days in there. You've already worked on the mitochondria, you're working on your senescent burden, you're optimizing your NAD pool, which essentially is going to be the energy that you need to do all this fat burning and everything. So, does that make a little bit more sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. And I think a Senolytic protocol is something that everybody that is really diving into these mitochondrial optimization routines should probably educate themselves on and use. I'm very interested to utilize the FOXO4. I've done a few 3-day courses with things like high dose fisetin, and it's definitely, you definitely kind of feel your body getting rid of some crap in there. And it seems like this is a good opportunity to do something, whereas it looks like the 5-amino 1-MQ is essentially starving off any potential bad cells from receiving any NAD. And then, as they're starved off of that NAD, we're then deploying the FOXO4 to basically attack them, get rid of them, flush them out. Now we know that there's no bad cells that could be taking in the NAD. So if we want to load NAD with an NMN or a NAD injection or infusion or whatnot, we can basically reload, rejuvenate, recharge with a big dose of that for a few days, and then basically go about another course. Now, without diving too deep into Senolytic protocols, because that's a whole other podcast, is this something, because they're short term, is this something that you would recommend maybe after an mTOR dominant phase or between an AMPK dominant and mTOR dominant phase to kind of rejuvenate and recharge before going at a different training goal? Or is it something we want to do just kind of in the middle of a hard push?
That's a really good question. When I think about an optimal time to do FOXO4, there's definitely tie-ins with mTOR and AMPK, but what I really want to think about is optimizing the mitochondria before we do that. And then, exactly as you explained, kind of starving off some more of those senescent cells and making cleanup as easy as possible when we introduce that FOXO4 so it can have the biggest impact. Knowing that when you're doing the FOXO4, uh, that's going to be the only thing that you want to do for those 3 days. Um, if I'm thinking it through, like I would, based on what you're asking about AMPK or mTOR, it would probably be a better fit with the AMPK because you could even pair that with like some fasting. Just I'd probably do like high ketones on that day, so you have energy for your cells, supporting your antioxidant system. You're not adding extra stuff in there to be cleared out, and your training demand isn't really hard. So maybe even like a 3-day break in between phases, where it's just like some fasted cardio, um, really low food intake. So you're optimizing fission and autophagy and getting the most out of that FOXO4.
Makes sense. It makes perfect sense. Now, the only other thing that I want to touch on in terms of something that we can incorporate in really any of these phases, and you mentioned it before, it's the plasmalogens. So can you describe to us what are plasmalogens and why is it that we want to pair them with everything from a SS31 to a 1-MNA to a utilization in an mTOR dominant phase to a utilization in an AMPK dominant phase? Because it seems like there's a lot of use case. So with the most summarized explanation ever, can you tell us what plasmalogens are and why they seem to be something we want to incorporate in almost every phase of training optimization that we're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, really simply, we hear the term plasmalogen, and just so everybody's clear on exactly what they are, they're an ether linked phospholipid. And when we think about like membranes and the mitochondria and neurons, these are enriched with these plasmalogens, and plasmalogens essentially are like bricks for a building. So if the cell wall was a building, um, kind of a crude analogy, but the plasmalogens would be like the bricks for the building. Um, and when we think about what they can do, is they have um, they help scavenge reactive oxygen species, and the way that works, that vinyl ether bond um, works as sort of like this sacrificial antioxidant. And when we think about the inner membrane of cardiolipin and that curvature it's supposed to have, and the cristae, the density of the cristae, like that stuff's packed with plasmalogens. And when we think about that fusion fission balance and the signaling things in there, the OPA1, the MFN2, um, those membranes, when those happen, like both of those are what happens when we have those two parts of the mitochondria from fission and they join together, and the outer membrane joins together first. That's the MFN2, and the inner membrane, that's OPA1. Um, so the plasmalogens stabilize these membrane microdomains, and they also impact the membrane potential. So um, membrane potential is kind of like the dielectric properties of the inner membrane, and it tightens up that proton gradient and creates this higher, um, basically like torque from the ATP synthase efficiency. And when we think about if you go on prodrome.com, Dan Goodenow is absolutely brilliant. I mean, just awesome guy to learn from. I would tell everybody to go over there and check out the materials and upskill on plasmalogens. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on them. They're fascinating, but
I've been trying to get him on the podcast for months. I'm gonna make it happen, but he's a hard guy to lock down.
He is a hard guy to lock down. But just to give people the cliff notes, you'll see there's a plasmalogen neuro and there's a plasmalogen glia. And plasmalogen neuro are going to be your DHA based plasmalogens, and those are going to be really important for repair. Plasmalogen glia is going to be omega 9 plasmalogens, and those are going to be like glial cells in the brain, more anti inflammatory. That's a gross oversimplification. There's more to it, but just for simplicity's sake, I think that's a good starting point for people.
Now they're great products too. So I swear by plasmalogens. I've been utilizing them for probably 6 months now, and I've noticed a lot of differences, and I've noticed a lot of little things over time. But incorporating them into any phase, what can the average, let's say, athlete, biohacker, person that's watching this podcast right now, trying to optimize in any regard, what are they going to notice from incorporating plasmalogens as they build up over time?
That's a really good question in terms of like what you're actually going to notice. I'll speak on my experience and maybe this will help people. So I was taking them for a couple months, and it wasn't anything like, if you drink a cup of coffee, you got energy. It wasn't like as soon as I start taking these, like instantly my brain's better. Like I can remember more stuff. But then, after a couple months, it's funny, I was talking to one of my friends, and we were talking about plasmalogens, and he's like, what have you noticed? And I'm like, I don't know if I really noticed anything like extreme. I mean, I feel like, and then as I was saying this, and I'm continuing to talk, I'm like, I feel like I've been recovering really well from my workouts. And I was like, I have been recovering a little bit better from my workouts. And when I wake up in the morning, like I just feel focused. Oh, and then we started talking about something else. He asked me, made the mistake of asking me a science question and got the the long short answer. And he's like, "Man, how do you remember that stuff?" And that I joke with him, bulldog science, training, and anything about my fiance. Those are the four things I can remember. But like my memory in general was just I felt like it was clearer. I had access to things easier. My sleep was better. All these little subtle health things. But what was profound is, and I absolutely love the prodrome scan. Um, it's truly a functional test. When you look at these ratios of your phospholipids, you can actually see what kind of wear and tear do I have on the membrane in my digestive tract. What kind of wear and tear do I have on my mitochondria, my neurons, kidneys, all that stuff, because all those membranes, any membrane in our body is going to be made of phospholipids, and the
Hmm.
the prodrome essentially looks at if all these membranes are perfect, we're over here. How many standard deviations away from that are we? And then when we compare, how's this getting used up compared to this? It's easy to kind of zero in on, oh, this is kind of like from step 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. This is how our body's compensating. And then the best part about it is instead of being like, oh man, I'm headed for neurodegenerative disease, it's like now all of a sudden you have this beautiful, perfectly written out recipe of um, the exact phospholipids that you need to replace these membranes that are getting used up more. And we already have measured what perfect is. So if we just put back in what we need and support our body with things like exercise, lifestyle, and peptides, pharmaceuticals where needed to support the signaling to rebuild. When we have these raw materials, plasmalogens in, um, you can actually measure like, oh, I was at risk of neurodegenerative disease and now got a perfect functioning brain, and it'll line exactly up with like how you're thinking and everything. So it's something that, to summarize, subtly you're going to feel and you're going to notice and you're going to kind of have that aha day, but it's not going to be profound. But you can actually measure it, and I'd encourage you to measure it like 1 to 2 times a year and just see how you're doing on these things. And it's confirmation that the protocols you're doing are working, because it's with regular blood tests. There are so many things that can throw off your numbers. With a prodrome scan, because you're looking at how a membrane's been used up, it is the only that I'm aware of, like truly functional test that I'm not aware of how you distort like the wear and tear on a membrane. So I think it's extremely accurate and uh, awesome confirmation for that you're on the right track with the stuff you're doing, all that huge investment you're making in supplements and time and training.
I agree 1,000%. And that's something that you don't need a doctor's prescription for. You can buy the Prodrome test from Prodrome Sciences directly, the same place where you get the plasmalogens. Now, there's a few other companies that make similar products, but I really do feel that Prodrome is a company that's really on top of the game. And Dr. Goodnow is really at the cutting edge level of all the research on all this. So that's where I would generally recommend people go. Now, Anthony, I know you're an SSRP guy. You work very closely with Dr. Seeds, and another product that some people might think could be similar that Dr. Seeds has talked about is Fatty 15.
Uh-huh.
How does Fatty 15 differ from the plasmalogens?
So when we think about fatty 15, it's a odd chain fatty acid, and odd chain literally means, like, if we think about our even numbers like 2, 4, 6, 8, odd 1, 3, 5, 7. So fatty 15, it's pentadecanoic acid. And if we think about pentadeca, remember BPC 157, pentadeca, and that means 5, 10, so 15. It's a 15 chain, 15 odd chain fatty acid. Um, then when we think about, well, what's this mean? Why is this structure relevant? What's up with fatty 15? With an odd chain fatty acid, it's not gonna oxidize. So when we think about some of the benefits that we get from fish oils, um, when we take in like EPA, DHA, and those get metabolized into resolvins, marasins, lipoxins, and protectins, the pro-resolving mediators, and those modulate inflammation. And then things like DHA get integrated into the membranes, things like that. With fatty 15, what it's going to allow you to do is it could get integrated to where it's creating fluidity in a membrane, and not having to take a higher amount of fish oils that you could run the risk of oxidation. So somebody that has a lot of oxidative stress, I think there can be some value there. Getting some of the structural integrity you need for a cell membrane without the risk of oxidation. Then also helps with iron transport. It The research on it is kind of cool. There's a book. Stephanie Van Watson wrote it. I think it's called The Longevity Molecule. And it's a whole book about the discovery of fatty 15, the claims on it, and everything. Really great read. I mean, even if you're not into science, like it's just a fun story. A lot of people might not know the background on this. So the Navy had been studying dolphins for like 40 years, and dolphins lifespan, um, dolphins are super intelligent. We all know that, and so they're perfect test subjects. But dolphins were living to, I think it was like anywhere from 9 to 12 years, and it was because they had changed the diet on these dolphins. The fish they were feeding them didn't have this pentadecanoic acid in it, and previously, like these dolphins were living to like their 20s or whatever. Dolphin had a great life. So when they did like all this, and Navy has the ability to do all kinds of cool testing that we could only dream about. When they did all this testing and they found out like, this pentadecanoic acid's missing. I wonder if we could give it to these dolphins, if that's the missing link. And they started seeing like all these health benefits. It was really miraculous. And then what they found is, dolphins are mammals and we're mammals. Wonder if it works in humans. So they started looking at these different populations, blue zones, and found that because they were eating things like whole dairy that hadn't been refined, that had pentadecanoic acid in it, and there wasn't a deficiency, these were things that people had in their bloodstream compared to other populations where they weren't putting this back in. Um, and they weren't living as long. So I wouldn't say, I guess my takeaway from it is it's a really great supplement, but um, I wouldn't say it's going to be like if you take this, you're going to live to 150. Good way to think about it is same thing I tell people on a multivitamin. Multivitamin's not going to improve your performance, but if you're deficient in things that are in a multivitamin, that could impede your performance. So
Hmm.
pentadecanoic acid, it's not going to make you live to 100, but if you're deficient in pentadecanoic acid, um, it's going to be harder to make it to 100.
So it's not necessarily making you immortal, but it might be blocking a few of the stray bullets that might be heading your way if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah.
Now, I do think that things like fatty 15, the plasmalogens and whatnot, they kind of fall under that kind of overreaching umbrella of things that we talked about supporting the integrity of the cell before we necessarily jump right to just driving cellular function and mitochondrial function with all these peptides. We're actually giving it the raw constituents it needs to be a healthy cell and to perform to its fullest. We've also talked about things like antioxidants in the past, not on this podcast, but we've discussed glutathione, carbon 60 on this podcast. We went into a great amount of detail on urolithin A. What are some other things that we should look into leveraging? And we've had similar conversations before, but if I'm going to be taking the SLUs, the BAM15s, the SS31s, and all of these stronger chemical signaling items to just manipulate, enhance, and optimize cellular function, what's some more of this low-hanging fruit that we can add, like the plasmalogens, like the fatty 15, like the CoQ10s? What are some of these things that people might be overlooking that we can add to just make the whole process more efficient to get more bang for our buck from these drugs that we're taking?
Yeah, that's a excellent question. And I think I can't overemphasize to people the importance of, there's so many awesome compounds out there right now that it's hard not to just want to take the cool new thing. But the stuff that we're going to talk about here, like the, ground level, these are what your cells need. Um, Make this your foundation, invest in this. It's not wasted money. It's what's creating a platform to allow these other things to work well, and work well at doses that aren't going to put you in uh, position of maybe taking more than you need to, and compromising your health. So for me, like the foundation, absolutely not leaving home without it. I think plasmalogens are huge. I think B complex makes a lot of sense. Um, and I think that some other fats or things that people forget about, phosphatidylcholine, specifically the phosphatidylcholine complex that Body Bio has. Absolutely love it. And when we think about, well, why is phosphatidylcholine so important? Um, we're getting protection for our liver. We're getting protection for methylation. And it's like when you think about those broken parts in our cell that have oxidized, it's like swapping it out with fresh parts. So there's actually some of like the really high end doctors that celebrities go to do an IV PC, which is phosphatidylcholine IV, where it's literally like they're flushing out the bad part of the membrane and replacing it with good part of membrane. It's like taking your car in for an oil change. So phosphatidylcholine, super
Now,
awesome.
is that interchangeable with an alpha GPC? And is there any concern for TMAO?
If you do, so the TMAO concern with like carnitine or phosphatidylcholine is going to depend on the gut microbiome. Um, Not saying there's no danger with TMAO, but I think it's a lot less likely than people think it is. And even when you have the TMAO, um, it's not as much of a concern if you're doing the things to support gut health and detoxification.
Where does it relate to alpha GPC? Was the other part of that? Is that interchangeable? Is there one that's better than the other? Or
So alpha GPC, they're not really the same. The alpha GPC, glycophosphorylated version of phosphatidylcholine. When we think about our cell membrane, we have phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylserine, um, uh, PE, phosphatidyl. Oh man, I can't think of the name right now. There's two others. The 40, I think it's 43% of the cell membrane is phosphatidylcholine. Um,
Mhm.
when we think about an alpha GPC, that's gonna get absorbed and metabolized a little bit differently. In terms of where I use alpha GPC would be like before a workout, increase contractibility of fast twitch muscle fibers, increases acetylcholine, um, and but yeah, in terms of like restoring membranes and stuff, we want to stick to like phosphatidylcholine and ideally like an animal source phosphatidylcholine.
Mhm.
TUDCA, I think, is another huge one, especially for bodybuilders. You get the liver protection, but more importantly, um, when we think about the changes to cellular metabolism and where things can go wrong, without going into too much specifics, um, let's just say when you're in an mTOR dominant state for a lot of the time, because we do want to put on muscle, we're at greater risk of having protein misfolding. And TUDCA protects against protein misfolding in the endoplasmic reticulum. So great thing to have in there. Also helps
Mm.
with bioformation. So supporting our detoxification pathways and clearing the garbage out of our system. Super important there. The um, making sure you're getting like linoleic acid, alpha linoleic acid, for cardiolipin. And we want to think about like our omega-6, omega-3 ratio 4 to 1. So if you get that tested, that's a good number to shoot for. We want to think about things like huge thing that people are just now starting to really learn more about. And this is another one that could be a whole topic in and of itself, but like the glycocalyx. And the glycocalyx are these little hairs inside blood vessels that are made from sugar, and they help move blood. And when they get stiff and rigid, like we get clogs and problems. So something like solidexide, which is available overseas or compounding pharmacies, going to support glycocalyx. Um, the other kind of low hanging fruits, magnesium, vitamin D, if you're not taking those, I think um, significant amount of research, especially with magnesium being
Hmm.
part of hundreds of chemical reactions in the body. Super important. And magnesium's so cool because there's so many different kinds of it. Like just to give you a couple of scenarios, if we're in a phase of training where we're going really heavy, high neural demand, magnesium threonate crosses the blood brain barrier and has the biggest effect on the central nervous system. If we're having trouble with glucose metabolism, magnesium glycinate can be helpful. That also helps to, because it's bound to glycine, decompress the central nervous system, or bisglycinate would cross the blood brain barrier. When we think about if we want to support the Krebs cycle, like magnesium malate, magnesium citrate, if things aren't moving. um,
Hmm.
but yeah, just lots of different kinds of magnesium and such a incredible, easy add-on. Um, and um, trying to think, feel like for me, like I'm just going through my head in terms of like my basics. What I take, I take an ADK by Designs for Health. I
Hmm.
take phospholipid bound um, fish oil. I use, I rotate between Resolvins by Body Bio because that's also got the pro-resolving mediators in there, or Designs for Health krill oil, which has the astaxanthin, good mitochondria, especially like for your eyes and brain.
Hmm.
um, I take the balance oil from Body Bio. It's got your linoleic, alpha linoleic acid in there, cardiolipin support. I take the phosphatidylcholine complex that they have, um, and that's going to be that membrane support, liver support, um, and supporting methylation. Creatine, that's another huge one, low
Hmm.
hanging fruit. Um, Also a methyl donor. Um, and then I take the plasmalogens, neuro in the morning, glia in the evening, and I do. My homocysteine was a little bit higher last time. The long story on that one, but when your homocysteine's high, like that's when I take a break from like a 1-MNA or a 5-amino 1-MQ. But otherwise,
Hmm.
as I mentioned earlier, I do 1-MNA on non-training days. It improves prostacyclins and reduces inflammation in endothelial cells and recycles your NAD, or the 5-amino 1-MQ on a training day, where it's going to decrease the NNMT. So that makes more NAD available and helps with shrinking those fat cells, which anything I can do to shrink those fat cells, I'm an eater.
Yep, dude. Likewise, same thing here. There's so much that we can add in
Yeah.
terms of just the low hanging fruit before we even start to address all the cool combos and stacks and
Yeah.
everything that we went over. And honestly, it's like we could do this. Ended up being 2 episodes. I didn't have a good spot to even want to be able to be like, okay, we should probably cut now.
Yeah.
So I just figured you'd tell me if you had somewhere to go
Oh,
within the hour. But
no, it's
this ended up being two completely badass episodes, and I'm sure as long as your schedule is permitting, many more to come. But
love it.
Anthony, this has been insane. This is probably two of the most informative back to back peptide and cellular health and optimization episodes of, really, I can say this now, any podcast that I've been a part of, listened to, or been privileged enough to be involved with in any way, shape, or form. And this is going to be 2 episodes that people can go back to and listen to over and over and over again. I know I will. So until we get you back next time, where can we find you? Where can we dive into more of your information? And where can we get some of these blends and products that you've been working on?
Thank you so much. I'm truly humbled, and anytime I'm always excited to talk to you. I did start a school community, which I'm really excited about. It's just called Castor, Built to Adapt. I'll send a link to you for the
Mhm.
show notes, and it's completely free. My goal, like, if you guys can't tell, I'm really passionate about this stuff. I love having conversations around it. I love learning from people in the community, and I love throwing ideas out there. So I just want to get as many people in there as we can, so we all have a place to go and talk and learn from each other, and help each other reach our goals. The products I have, our line is called AlchemIQ, AlchemIQ, and we have the so our clever play on words is on like AIQ, so like short for Alchem IQ. We have AIQ 332, and that's our SLU urolithin blend. We have AIQ 931. That's the bioglutide. And then we do have a BAM 15. And um, we had a plain SLU product, but when I saw the importance of urolithin A, I was like, let's go get some urolithin A. Like, it doesn't make sense not to have them together. So we put them together. Um, the uh, products we got coming, kind of excited about. We literally just got the picture for the label. We're going to have an ATX 304 product out, and
Awesome.
can't wait for that. Yeah, it's a really cool one. Um, but on Instagram, I'm really the school communities where I'm the most active. I try to answer as many questions as I can. I do a monthly Q&A, and I've got a free webinar coming up on the ATX 304. And um, yeah, I'm always excited to have conversations with people. So please reach out if you guys have any questions, if there's something I can help you guys with. And if you have questions about, your the slew amount that you should be taking, I hope we covered that. But, if I can bring any more clarity, I'd rather you reach out to me than do something that's going to affect your health and um, in a bad way.
Awesome. Well, Anthony, thank you again so much. It's always a pleasure to have you here, and I'm sure we'll have you back for many more. We're going to have a discussion on the ATX because that's another one that's a phenomenal product that I'm very excited about as well. I've done a little bit of experimenting with, but we'll have to get in and do another podcast on that one because that's a whole other topic. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the DDT Method Podcast.